Hey everyone, and a special hello to our Vintage Car Chronicles listeners tuning in from Spotify, Deezer, Apple Music, or YouTube.
You got it.
Today, we're doing things a little differently. We're going
Uh,
deep, deep, deep on a car that, you know, kind of try to rewrite the rule book, the Renault Avantime.
exactly.
Now, on Vintage Car Chronicles, we're all about giving you those classic car stories. But today, we're going a step further.
Yeah.
Taking a whole stack of articles, research, really anything we could find to dig out those really fascinating details about the Avantime, the stuff you don't always hear.
Think of it this way. We've boiled down like a whole library's worth of info into this deep dive so you can basically become an Avantime expert without pulling an all-nighter, you
I
know?
like that. So the Avantime, right, where do we even start with this
Hmm.
thing? It's like they took a coupe, a minivan, sprinkled in some spaceship vibes, and just said, let's roll the dice.
You know what? That's not a bad way to put it at all. Renault, along with Matra, the folks who helped them develop it, they were after something totally unique. They called it coupéspace, this blend of sportiness and, that speciousness you get from a minivan. It was like a crossover before crossover was even a word.
Coupe space.
Yeah.
It even sounds futuristic, even now.
Yeah.
Okay, so picture this. It's the early 2000s, you've had your Renault Espace, and you've loved it. It's been the ultimate family car.
Sure.
But now the kids are all grown up, and you're ready for something a little more stylish, something that says, hey, this is me.
And that's exactly who the Avantime was going for. People who had owned in a space, loved the space, but were looking for a little more excitement in their drive, without, of course, giving up that comfort. It
Yeah.
was all about appealing to drivers who wanted to express themselves.
And I got to say, the Avantime's design definitely makes a statement. It's unlike anything else out there, even today. I mean, those huge double-hinged doors, that sloping roof, the massive panoramic glass roof. It's like a concept car they actually decided to put into production.
Well, and speaking of concept cars, you're absolutely right. A lot of the Avantime's design elements came straight from the 1999 concept car. Renault and Matra, they were really determined to bring that bold vision to life, you know? But all that ambition came with its share of engineering headaches.
I can only imagine. I mean, those doors alone, just getting those to work must have been a nightmare. And then there's that enormous glass roof. They must have had to come up with some seriously creative solutions to make that thing strong enough, right?
Absolutely. The Avantime's design really pushed the limits of what was possible back then. Those double-hinged doors, they were gorgeous, don't get me wrong, but to get them to open smoothly and, most importantly, safely, took some incredibly precise engineering.
Right.
And the panoramic roof, yeah, that was a huge structural challenge. They needed this intricate system of reinforcements and bracing to make sure the car was stiff enough, but without, sacrificing that open, airy feel they were going for. Oh, and then they also had to figure out how to seamlessly blend all these different materials for the body. Steel, composite materials, aluminum. It was pretty groundbreaking for the time.
Yeah. That almost had taken a toll on the development, right? I mean, a car this complex, it couldn't have been easy to get it ready for production.
Oh, you're spot on there. All those engineering challenges, and they had some production hiccups along the way, too. It all added up to some major delays.
Wow.
They initially planned to launch the Avantime in '99, same time as the concept car, but it didn't actually hit the market until 2001, 2 whole years behind schedule.
2 years. In the car world, that's like a lifetime.
Yeah.
I wonder how those delays affected how it was received,
Yeah.
especially in a market that's always hungry for the next big thing.
Yeah, it makes you wonder.
I guess we'll dive into all that after we
It really makes you think how those delays maybe even shaped uh, the Avantime's whole story. Like, by 2001, the car world had moved on a bit, and maybe people just weren't ready for something so out there.
Yeah, you wonder if that initial excitement kind of fizzled out by the time it actually arrived. But okay, let's talk about the inside of this thing, because from the pictures I've seen, it's just as wild as the outside. Did it actually, deliver on that whole coupe space promise?
Oh, absolutely. The Avantime's interior, it's a real lesson in like unconventional design, but with luxury. It feels so spacious and airy, thanks in part to that huge panoramic roof we were talking about. The dashboard, it's actually pretty similar to the S-Space the Third, which makes sense because they share the same platform.
Yeah.
But then they threw in these really unique touches, like the instrument cluster right in the center of the dash, all digital. Can you imagine how futuristic that must felt back in 2001?
Yeah, it must have felt like you were stepping into a spaceship. And those seats, they look more like something you'd find in a fancy lounge than a car. I'm also really curious about those seat belts built right into the front seats. Was that like a common thing back then?
Not at all. Putting the seatbelts right into the seats, that was a totally new idea back then. Really smart move, both for style and safety. It gave the interior this really sleek look, and it actually made the seatbelts work better because they were always positioned right.
It's amazing how something that seems like a small detail can make such a big difference. Oh, and we can't forget the Grand Air feature. You could lower all four windows and that panoramic sunroof with just one button. Talk about bringing the outside in.
It was brilliant. That Grand Air feature basically turned the Avantime into this open-air haven, perfect for a scenic drive or just enjoying the sunshine. It really shows how much they focused on creating a drive-in experience that was different, not just getting from A to B.
All right, so we've talked design, we've talked innovation, but now I got to ask, what was it actually like behind the wheel? Did it drive like a sporty coupe, or was it more like a lumbering minivan?
Now that's where things get really interesting. You'd think with its size and that unusual shape that the Avantime would be kind of soft and a little clumsy to drive, but honestly, it was surprisingly nimble and fun.
No way. Really, I wouldn't have guessed that at all. How did they make that happen?
Well, for one, they gave it a really well-tuned suspension. It did a fantastic job of keeping the body roll under control. Like, it stayed surprisingly flat through corners, and the center of gravity was pretty low, partly because of that lightweight aluminum structure on top, and that helped with the agility, too. Plus, even though it was big, it wasn't super heavy, which made it feel even more responsive.
Wow, so they really did manage to create this unique blend of space, style, and drivability. But then there's the big question. Why wasn't it a success? I mean, it was so innovative, it had this unique appeal, but it just didn't catch on. Why?
That's the million-dollar question, right? And I don't think there's just one simple answer. It was probably a bunch of things all coming together that made the Avantime, well, a commercial flop.
Okay, so let's break it down. What were some of the key factors?
Well, the price was definitely a factor. When it first came out, the Avantime was marketed as a premium car, and it had the price tag to match. So that put it up against all those established luxury brands. And for a lot of buyers, the Renault name just didn't carry the same weight.
Yeah, I get that. Brand perception can be tough to overcome, especially when you're talking luxury cars. But was there anything else that might have held it back?
Remember all those delays we talked about earlier? Those might have had something to do with it too. By the time the Avantime actually hit the dealerships, I think that initial buzz had probably died down and people might have already moved on to other cars.
Right, timing is everything in the car world. But didn't Renault also launch another pretty unconventional car around the same time, the Velsatis? Didn't that cause some confusion in the market?
You're right, they did. The Velsatis was another car with a really bold style, also a little unconventional, and launching it at the same time as the Avantime created a bit of a problem for Renault. It was almost like they were competing with themselves, muddling their brand identity and making potential buyers unsure what they stood for.
Sounds like they were trying to do too much all at once, spreading their resources too thin across two products that were already kind of niche. But were there any criticisms of the Avantime itself that might have contributed to its downfall?
Well, some people said that the interior, as cool and innovative as it was, didn't quite live up to the whole luxury image the car was trying to project. Like, the materials and the overall quality weren't quite as good as other luxury brands in that price range.
Interesting. So it's like they nailed the big picture, the concept, the design, but maybe they missed the mark on some of the smaller details. Did the lack of practicality play a role? I mean, it's spacious, but it's not exactly a minivan when it comes to functionality, right?
That's a good point. The Avantime, yeah, it was roomy, but it didn't have that same modularity and flexibility you get in a minivan. No removable seats or clever seat arrangements, and that might have turned off some families or people who needed that extra versatility.
So it sounds like it was a whole bunch of factors combined.
Yeah.
The price, the timing, the confusion in the market, and maybe some missed opportunities when it came to, like, refinement and practicality. All of that came together to make the Avantime, well, a flop. It's kind of sad, isn't it? A car that was so ahead of its time, so full of potential, but it just never found its audience.
Yeah, it's a real shame. The Avantime, it was a bold experiment, a real testament to the creativity and the daring of those teams at Renault and Matra. They really took a swing with this one. And even though it didn't, resonate with buyers back then, you got to admire their vision.
Yeah, it's a classic ahead of its time story, right? I mean, look at how much the market has changed since then. Crossovers are everywhere now, and unconventional designs are becoming more and more the norm. It makes you wonder if if the Avantime might actually be a hit if it were released today.
It's an interesting thought, isn't it? Could the Avantime, a car that was seen as too weird, too different back in the early 2000s, actually find success in today's world? It's definitely possible.
I can see it now, like a modern version of the Avantime, all the latest tech, a more refined interior, maybe even electric. It would be a real showstopper, something that stands out in a sea of, kind of generic crossovers.
It would be a big move for Renault, but it could be a smart one. They've shown that they're willing to try unconventional designs, and the Avantime's legacy, it could be a powerful tool in today's market.
I could totally picture it. A sleek, futuristic Avantime just gliding silently through the streets, turning heads everywhere it goes. It would be a statement. A symbol of Renault's commitment to innovation, their willingness to push the boundaries.
And you never know, maybe a new Avantime could even achieve the commercial success that the original missed out on. It would be a fitting tribute to a car that dared to be different, a car that, even with its imperfections, helped to pave the way for the cars we see on the roads today.
Well said. And to all our Vintage Car Chronicles listeners, a huge thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the Renault Avantime. We hope you enjoyed the ride.
And don't forget to catch a brand new episode of Vintage Car Chronicles every single day on Spotify, Deezer, Apple Music, and YouTube. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss out on more incredible stories from the world of classic cars.